Thank you for staying on for this session this afternoon. It's a really important session. It is the call to action part of the day. We are going to be looking specifically at Southwark Diocese and what we might be able to do in Southwark, but what we might be able to do in Southwark applies to every other diocese. And as I said before, it's not essential, or at least we shouldn't be put off if we think the motion might not pass in our diocese. The important thing is that it's debated, and it may get passed in some and it may not in others, and that's fine. But by debating it, we will raise awareness. Lots of people don't know about the situation. So we're going to look at the motion that we've drafted and a potential accompanying paper in some detail a bit later on. But before we do that, and before I hand over to Charlie, who's going to very kindly agree to talk to us for a few minutes, for 10 minutes, I just want to say as introduction, I just wanted to remind us what the current situation is in the Church of England. Do you know that churches can still say no to female priests applying to be their vicars? Churches can still say no to female priests blessing the bread and wine in their services. Churches can still say no to female bishops or male bishops if they have ordained women. Do you know that churches can still teach that women need to be under the authority of men? And there is no end date for these arrangements. And every year we ordain more men who do not fully accept women's ministry and want to use these provisions. That is the current situation. What's wrong with that? Can't we live with that? Can't we all mutually flourish alongside that? Let me say, the arrangements are unjust. Women comprise 2/3 of our congregations and work hard, often doing ministries that many men frankly don't want to do, and yet we are denied equality. The arrangements are untrue to the gospel. Jesus called for the first to be last and the last first. You don't have to be a mathematician to work out that what that means, if you put it into practice, is a radical call to equality. The arrangements are unsafe. There is a huge body of evidence that understandings of male privilege correlate to the abuse of women and girls. And the church cannot hope to address the harms caused by sexism in our world when we have institutionalized discrimination against women ourselves. The requirement for all clergy to say that they accept the current discrimination effectively silences women, which is an act of violence, and it makes it hard to even disclose abuse or say that we are unhappy about the arrangements, because many of those who do speak out experience marginalisation and gaslighting. Finally, the arrangements are exploitative, with the church greedily accepting women's labour, both lay and ordained, but not giving us the dignity and protection of equality. Going to address what we can do now in the light of all this, but first I'm going to introduce you to Charlie Bell. Now some of you, to say a few words on the harm of discrimination in general. Charlie probably needs little introduction to many of you. He is a psychiatrist and priest in the Church of England, serving here in Southwark at St John the Divine in Kennington. And as an academic, he teaches biochemistry to undergraduates while pursuing his research interest in biological markers that help us to identify psychopathy. So, thank you very much. Charlie, over to you. Let's give Charlie a round of applause.
Well, thank you all very much. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So it's great to be with you. Understanding psychopathy is a helpful thing to be able to do when you're engaging in Christian communities. So my work as a psychiatrist often aids my work in the parish, and not just in the parish, certainly at General Synod. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about the challenges which I think we're all facing as a church, as a kind of, they're much more than the kind of tinkering around the edges that is often presented, but we're actually talking about fundamental structural and systemic challenges that are relating to what the church is. So the manifestation, I guess, of the church, how it presents itself, actually says an awful lot about what it is as an institution. And I think we haven't always engaged in those questions as much as we should. So as some of you will know, I work with as a trustee of Together for the Church of England. So one of the groups looking to engage with other groups for to engage with and try and break down some of the structural discrimination that the Church of England has continued to perpetrate. And of course, it's always dangerous to say the Church of England, because especially those of us wearing collars, but those of us also who are not wearing collars are part of the Church of England, even if it does things in our name that we don't particularly like. And hence, I think those of us who see and spot discrimination in other forms are kind of called and obliged to do something about it. So a lot of my work has been with LGBTQIA people, queer people who, as you will know, are another group of people who are actively excluded from much of the ministry of the church, either giving ministry or indeed receiving it. And the reason that I think we need to start talking again, and I know many of you have been talking across the time, but many of us need to get ourselves in gear again about the obvious and structural discrimination against women, which we've been told is a good thing and which we must sign up to, is that it just speaks yet again of it's sort of an internal rot in the institution of the church. And actually, I think we are, much like many other parts of the world, recognizing increasingly the importance of looking at this with a bit of a wide lens view and saying, why is it that this is the case? So is this a woman's problem, for example? Is it a gay issue? Is it a trans issue? Is it a racial justice? All of those things are true. All of these things, in a sense, these are the groups that are being discriminated against. But the issue is not with those groups. The issue is with the centre or with the institution, or indeed with the kind of, almost like the kind of the non-structure, the things that invisibly exist behind the assumptions we make, the beliefs we have, and so on, which many of us are told that we must believe in order to be good members of the Church of England. And so, actually, I think the first thing we need to do in the church at the moment is to name where the issue is. The issue is not with women, LGBT people, whatever else. The issue is with the institution. And so, given there's an issue with the institution, and the issue is one of discrimination and a failure to recognize the gifts and the image of God in other people, which is a pretty simple thing to do, I think, although something which we have manifestly and endlessly failed to do as a church. The minute that we've recognized where the issue is, then we can start to engage with the institution and with the issue as it actually is. And so we're really talking about an edifice which has grown up, which has a life of its own, and which then tries to suck us into it. And in terms of women's ministry, that's usually a patriarchal edifice. It's usually an edifice that is kept alive by careful conversations in back rooms, and careful conversations where people learn how to speak the language of the institution, and you get on, to use that dreadful phrase, you get on by learning the language and then saying the words, whether or not you know even what the words mean, let alone whether you believe them. And the language of the church and the story of the church at the moment, I think, is one which basically says, if you're a man, you can have what you want because the man is essentially the normal, the normative. And so, for example, if you're a man and you have a woman who happens to be your bishop, then you can have your own bishop. If you're a man and you're a bishop and you don't want to ordain women, well, then you don't have to, and so on and so on. And we fail to recognize, of course, that therefore every choice is really for men to make. And so every choice is, what would a man need? What do you need in this particular circumstance? Which I think is a fascinating reversal of the use and the meaning of the word need. When I did a program with the BBC about, gosh, 2 years ago, I think, about the LLF process, when we were, to quote the program, coming to the end of the living in love and faith process, which I suppose was as gloriously naive as it can be. I remember the producer of the program saying to me, can you explain something to me? People who I'm interviewing keep using the word flourishing, and I don't know what it means because it seems to mean everything and nothing at the same time. It's a very sort of Church of England word. And it was interesting because I thought, yes, actually, we do talk a lot about flourishing, but usually what flourishing seems to mean in a church setting is to allow people who have particular views to continue to exist in a wider milieu where most people don't. And actually, the reality in terms of women's ministry is that mutual flourishing really is not mutual. Mutual flourishing is allowing women to do their jobs, which is not really the definition of either mutual or flourishing. And it's allowing them to do it in a structure and an edifice which continues to say you can do them, but at the behest of a man. And so I think one of the questions we need to come back to when we think about mutual flourishing, when we think about guiding principles and all the rest of it, is to say, for who? For who is this flourishing? And who actually, in this case, is the target or the one against whom discrimination is aimed? And I think this really is essentially the problem, which is that we have heard an awful lot, even in the run up to your conference, which I'm very sorry I'm not there for, but the run up to your conference, we've heard discussions again about essentially these ghastly women writing and saying these things that because they don't care about us, they don't love us, the people that don't think they should be or don't think they are priests, and it's not fair, and they're victimizing us and all the rest of it. It's not about taint, despite the fact that it very much looks like it. We need this. We need. And my concern is that the more and more that we buy into the language of need, the more and more that we inevitably create and embed and concrete over the structural imbalances and the structural discrimination and oppression which we've ended up allowing to become central to the Church of England. So I think in the last 30 years, 40 years, probably to be fairer, we've moved from a church that is truly established. That is a church that engages the ministry of all those that come to it, that provides the ministry to all those that come to it, and so on. We've never done it perfectly. We've always been racist as a church. We've always had elements within us that are deeply discriminatory towards disabled people, and so on and so forth. But we've actually baked into the very DNA now of the church the idea that we are no longer seeing ourselves as comprehensive and established. And that, for me, is a significant change. We often talk about conservatives and liberals. It feels to me that that is a major change to what the church is, that we have moved away from being one thing and we've turned into being another. So what does that do to people in the church? Well, I think first and foremost, and it's been mentioned already, it gaslights people. It tells people that actually either they are the problem or the problem that they are clearly identifying, noting down and making obvious is not a problem at all. And in fact, worse, you are the problem. So not only do you not have a problem, but you are a problem. And each time you say, well, I think this, and I think we should think of this, and that, then you become more and more of a problem because you're naming a problem which the church has decided is not a problem. And so the more and more you become a fly in the ointment, the more and more that you say that there is a problem, you become an increasing problem. And you then get words that we've seen in the last couple of weeks, even that I've increasingly had thrown at me and you've had thrown at you for goodness knows how long, things like shrill and unfair, and all of these sort of words, prejudiced against men, wonderfully absurd statement that's been made. And these things don't just do damage to the institution, they do the horrible damage to the individuals who are then found in the place whereby they are being told they are the problem or they are the discriminator. And so we really live in a church in which and women who are saying, might we minister on the same basis as men, are being told, you are the prejudiced ones, you are the discriminator, you are the problem. And that is a very difficult narrative to turn around, because we are in a church which still thinks that men are men and then men should be in charge, as much as we pretend it's not the case. We even think different flavors of men should be in charge. We think if you don't believe in women's ministry from a conservative evangelical perspective, you should get your own flavor of male bishop. And if you don't believe in women's ministry from a conservative Catholic perspective, you should get your own flavor of bishop, despite the fact that I thought it was just about being male. But no, it's about being the right flavor of male, which feels to me to be an extraordinary state of affairs for us to have found ourselves in. But what this does is not just damage women's ministry, which we know it does. And my goodness, don't we need to listen to that, particularly as men? Don't we need to just listen rather than tell women before they've even finished the sentence, yes, I know it's difficult for you, but... So the first thing it does is damage women's ministry. The second thing, of course, it does is damage women more generally, and our ministry to women, or indeed our ministry. So women in the pews. For example, my sisters, when I was young, we went to a Forward in Faith parish by mistake, which was a very Bell family thing to do. And suddenly my sisters said, "Oh, well, I'm not allowed to do that." And at which point, of course, it all suddenly became clear that if you're giving that as the image within a single church, it's bad enough. But if we bake that into the nature of the church, which says, yes, women are sort of equal, but they're not, that says an awful lot to the women that we then minister to. But just as importantly, it also damages the whole nature of who we are as a church. We are unable to speak to people in an effective way. We're unable to speak to people about justice because we have baked in injustice in the center of the way that we do our ministry. When I was in San Diego last year, 2 years ago, something like that, we went on the Pride March. And actually, I felt finally like I was part of an Episcopal church, the Episcopal Church. I felt like I was part of a church which was able to genuinely stand alongside people in that situation, because it wasn't, yes, we really support you, even though. It was, yes, we really support you. And until we get to a place where the church is able to do that, we are simply going to fail in what we're trying to do as our ministry. We're going to continue to damage the body of Christ. And we are failing to recognize how unreasonable it is forcing people to continue to not only live with and accept discrimination, but be called agents of discrimination themselves, which is fundamentally untrue and unjust. And that's going to damage us. So it's essentially, it damages us as a church. It damages us as individual Christian communities, and it also is deeply damaging to us as people. It's damaging to women, for all the reasons that we've just discussed and more, but it's also really damaging to men. It's damaging to men because it allows the lie to continue. It's damaging to men because it theologizes a patriarchal norm, which is untrue. So it is actually utterly damaging. And until we recognize that it is not fine to just bubble along with one another, but actually we need to speak some theological truths into a world which will not listen to us on, for example, on liberation matters, because we are in a church which continues to substantially and structurally discriminate. We don't have a hope of doing anything. So I think Southwark's a good place to start. I would say that. But I think we're going to see some changes in the next couple of years. The House of Bishops across the board is going to change substantially, not necessarily for the better, I'm afraid. We are increasingly seeing women, particularly women who are liberal, to quote, on the LGBT issue, being prevented by the Central Crown Nominations Commission from becoming bishops. Diocesan bishops. So we are in a really dangerous place. And I don't think there is any benefit whatsoever to keeping quiet and hoping things will get better, because they won't without us and without you. So thank you for all you're doing. Good luck for the rest of your day. I'm not sorry I'm in New York. It's very nice, but I'm very sorry I'm not with you. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. And whenever I can be of any help, please tell me, because I'd love to be able to do it.
Couple of questions. Anyone got a question for Charlie? That was really inspiring. Yeah, Anne. Stand up. Yeah. No, I think.
Charlie was talking about churches going on pride marches to stand in solidarity with the LGBT community. I'm wondering what he thinks the church community would do to stand alongside women. I'm just wondering what the obvious, if there is something of a parallel.
Join him, watch.
I mean, I think there are things. I mean, so the first answer to that, of course, is the world is not perfect, but my God, the world has moved on to such a degree compared to the church that there's almost this, well, why would we need the church's help with something like that? Why would, and actually, I think that's the sad reality, which is that as the rest of the world has kind of sort of grudgingly but trudged its way forward, the church has kind of baked into itself this idea that moving forward is not necessary. So I think that's the first answer. The second one is things like my concern about the church being involved in things like International Women's Day and so on is it's great. It's great that, for example, Bishop Sarah will be talking on International Women's Day, which she has done for the last couple of years, and giving a perspective of the Church of England. But how can we stand up, particularly the men in the church, how can we stand up and say, yes, no, we are absolutely, front and centre in favour of women's liberation, I always find a slightly tricky term, because of course it's a majority, not a minority issue. But anyway, but how can we stand up in support of these measures when next week we have to go to a meeting in which we then have to sign yet another time that we agree with the 5 guiding principles, or where we all show how happy we are, how much we rejoice that someone's been ordained that doesn't ordain women. So it just feels like we're being phony when we do it. Now, I think we should do it. I think more men should stand up and be counted on occasions like IWD. But yes, I mean, one of the main differences is that actually the church, it's very easy to be hypocritical in this, and individuals amongst us can possibly say stuff, but I think we need to then see it as a call to action rather than necessarily trying to see ourselves as supporting the rest of the world, because there are things to be resolved, as you will all know, in the kind of cultural misogyny that continues to be incredibly pervasive in society. But who are we as an institutional church at the moment to talk about discrimination when we've baked it in?
Thank you, Charlie. I think we've got time for 2 questions. I know April's had her hand up. You would like... Actually, we'll do 3. Okay. April.
Thank you so much for that. One of the things that I picked up from it, which I hadn't thought about before, and I can hardly believe this, that actually it was the whole system was imposed by men. Of course it was. But the other men who were involved were Parliament. And actually we would have nothing like the system that we've got now had Parliament not come in at a crucial moment and insisted upon it. But in Parliament, of course, we've got to have a change, and there are very large numbers of women in Parliament, with the result that they are very angry with the Church of England for behaving as they do.
Yeah. Thank you, April.
I suppose the question... my question kind of comes down to not just women, but also people of colour and queer people as well. How to stay in this institution that wasn't necessarily made for you, wasn't taken into didn't take into consideration your needs, your diverse variety of needs and situations and histories. So how can we stay in such an institution that was never made for us?
How do you stay? Yeah. Resist by leaving, but better resist by staying. But anyway. Charlie.
Yeah, so just very briefly on the political thing. You're pushing, there's an open door. I've met with a lot of politicians recently on the LGBT issue, and there's an open door. They won't necessarily be able to do anything in terms of they can't do the legislation, although they can fiddle around with it. But they want to hear. And those who disagree with us, I was going to call them our opponents, those who disagree with us, don't hold back. They will go and complain and moan and make a big fuss and song and dance and the rest of it. We need to be doing the same. So write to your MPs and all the rest of it. They will want to hear about it. In terms of how do you stay, God knows. And I mean that in a flippant, but also in a sort of genuine way. I have no idea. I didn't grow up in Anglican, which I'm very proud to say. I grew up in the United Reformed Church, although I grew up, as my grandmother would want me to say, in the Presbyterian United Reformed Church, because there were 2 versions, despite it being united, which often feels a bit like the Church of England. But I became an Anglican because I grew up in the life and worship of a cathedral. That was where I came. That's where I really developed my faith. And in a sense, I really feel like I am just a fairly bog standard Anglican. But I agree that the church is not not created for people who are not the kind of cis het male thing. That's what the church is for, and has always been for, and frankly, I remain, because I feel like at this point in time, the Anglicanism, which I genuinely think is important and holy and life-giving, matters. And because I don't want that Anglicanism to be lost from the Church of England. I think it could be. I really think it could be. And so I feel like part of my role, and part of our roles perhaps together, is to hold on to it and to refuse to let it go. That said, I will never say to anybody, remain in the church, if it doesn't feel like the right thing for them. And I think we have to recognise that the sheer weight of discrimination that comes on people when they're in the church can be too much. And I fully understand when people say, do you know what? I've done this for a season and now I'm hurting and I need a break from it. So I do it because I like the ministry of awkwardness. And knowing some people from Watch, I'm fairly sure that may be a well-known and well-trodden path for some others in the room. But the ministry of awkwardness is a great ministry. But all we want, really, is an enlivened and open, comprehensive Anglicanism. We're not really asking for anything particularly outrageous. We're simply asking for the church to be more like the church.
Thank you, Charlie. Our Zoom session's about to finish. We've just got time for your question.
Charlie, thank you very much for what you've said. I just wonder whether you could say a word or two about the interplay between the pastoral provisions that are being negotiated and discussed at the moment in relation to living in love and faith and the 5 guiding principles. Because that's obviously quite a complex interplay.
Yeah, it's very complex. So the argument at the moment, which is something called delegated episcopal ministry, although it's called that today, and by next Friday it'll be called something else. But there's essentially this idea that you'll be able to choose a bishop on the basis of whether or not they think the prayers of love and faith are acceptable or not. Also, whether they ordain people who are in same-sex marriages and various other things. It feels to me a strange state of affairs for us to be in when we start to say that you can choose your bishop depending on what they believe, because it then depends on what we mean by what they believe, and we could end up in a very absurd position. But that's where we're sort of heading. There's been a lot of pushback from this becoming structural in any form, particularly from women in the House of Bishops who have said, we've been there, we've done that, and this is not a healthy or happy way to be. I don't know where it's going to land. There's also been pushback, of course, from a lot of conservative evangelicals who say, no, we want to have more structural provision than what is there for women's ministry. I think there's a possibility that if delegated episcopal ministry becomes less than what's currently on offer for women's ministry, or for the 5 guiding principles, I actually think there's a possibility even then to chip back at and to use that as a hook into trying to smash down some of the stuff around the 5 guiding principles. But it's all very much in the air. And one of the things which a large number of women who are members of the House of Bishops have said to me is, we're really terrified that we're going to do to you what you did to us. And we really don't want that to happen because it's a disaster. So watch this space, I think. But definitely those conversations are definitely interlinked. And I don't know where it's going to end up, but we can't be in the same position where we yet again put in more structural rules and regulations around essentially dismantling what is meant to be the body of Christ, which therefore needs both legs, both arms, both eyes, and all the rest of it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's give Charlie.